Let's welcome back Josh Mann, Product Director, to give us a deeper view into the RELEX product portfolio. Welcome, Josh.
Hi, thank you. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I'm going to talk you through a few of the upcoming and exciting features and functions that we have as part of our product roadmap. And as Sarah said, any questions, please feel free to put them forward. It's a great forum to discuss this. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is go through some of the core principles and ideology around how we go about our roadmap and development practices. So the first thing is to consider the environment we're in. And obviously retail change is accelerating. This isn't new news to anyone, but it's something that we must take into account when we think about any of our development as a software product. So one of the first things that we consider from a change perspective is the disruption in external shocks, particularly as what we've seen in the last 18 months or so, but also disruptive players like Amazon and how they're taking different approaches to the market and the industry as a whole, new technology and the drive towards micro-fulfillment centers and omni-channel models and new business models that have been expedited by the COVID situation. Then there's also the power shift and the competition aspect to this. Consumers are becoming more aware of their product from a traceability and a transparency perspective, which goes all the way down to price. Charging premiums on price for commodities is no longer possible, and cost efficiency is key to developing and thriving in the market. Then there's also urbanization and demographic change. So that's driving new types of convenience, new format stores, home delivery, those kind of things that we need to make sure that we're accounting for and have solutions for going forwards. Retailers need to be adaptable, and as a software product, we need to adapt and flex to those new requirements as well. And then also sustainability. You would have heard mention about that over the last couple of days, and it's a key foundational component to how we operate as a business as a whole. So with our product standpoint, we also need to make sure we're focusing on areas that we can accentuate and develop that message and ideology. And one personal way of doing that is obviously reducing food waste and spoilage as a whole, but it goes well beyond that as well. The other thing to note here is some of these components are conflicting, really. If you think about home delivery and meal kits, that's not necessarily the most sustainable practice. So the other thing that we need to consider as a software product is to make sure that we're flexible and adaptable to the different needs and the different times that our customers are going to operate and utilize our software for. So talking of that, you would have heard of the living retail platform. That's how we see it as well, and that's how the whole ideology and principle of RELEX as a software platform has come from. The idea of being very flexible, configurable, being able to adapt on the fly almost to certain market conditions and our customer requirements. So that remains key to everything that we want to do from a development standpoint. And we need to make sure that we're staying agile enough to innovate in those areas as well. We have a key R&D approach to everything that we do with a RELEX Labs team that has many research and development activities ongoing every day. In tangent with that, we also work very closely with our customers on a daily basis to really work out what their strategic vision is, and make sure that's in line with the direction that we're going in from a vision and a strategy perspective. A lot of our input to our roadmap comes directly from the customers. That's how we operate as a company. The customer is a friend, and we want to make sure that we're doing right by them to make sure we're continually adding value into their business as well. Okay, so now some other key components that's always at the core of our thinking when we think about development. AI powered. So we've spoken about AI and machine learning a lot yesterday. And whilst it's a strategy and a tool that we're looking to explore, it has to solve pragmatic and real life problems. We need to have that at the core of our thinking when it comes to AI. But within that, we're leveraging all the data components that's available and making sure that's within a manner that's still performant and has the requisite speed and processing capability as well. Then the unified message, and you would have heard that again a few times likely across the last couple of days. But from a product perspective, we need to make sure that we're still developing and offering that value holistically across the cross-functional areas that we work with. And we'll touch on a few interesting areas where we're looking to do that in a few slides' time. Then the adaptability. Our core principle is to configure, not code, to make sure we empower users to be able to amend and flex, not just in the years to come, but in the decades to come. And that's how our system fundamentally works. But then also remembering that retail scale. As companies grow, we need to make sure that the processing power and the infrastructure grows alongside that. And we spoke yesterday about some of the work we're doing with horizontal and elastic scaling to make sure that that's continually at the core of what we're doing. It's all well and good coming up with all these fancy algorithms, but if you've not got the processing or computational power to support that, it becomes largely irrelevant. Okay, so some of where we're going from a future perspective. So we mentioned AI, and really when we think about that, we're looking at how that influences at the most granular level throughout the supply chain. We're thinking about things like basket case analysis. We're working out exactly what that transactional level data will actually do at the higher aggregate levels and the higher supply chain nodes, and really understanding what impact that would have. Getting really down to the consumer level of detail. That's a fundamental aspect that we want to consider in everything we're doing from a development standpoint. Then there's also the desire to improve store operations and the efficiency and the cost of labor. That's becoming all the more important, if it wasn't before, in understanding exactly where our costs are across the supply chain. So not just at the store level, but in DCs as well, and making sure there's an integrated methodology to that, and make sure we're offering and adding value in that key area as well. Then we have the smooth and efficient supply chain. So you would have heard me mention yesterday around automatic delivery flow smoothing, and this is core to that idea, really optimizing exactly where we have inventory across the supply chain, particularly in an environment where that supply chain structure is potentially changing. We have new micro fulfillment centers, different regional approaches to how we distribute products, including mixing centers and things like that. So we need to make sure that everything we're doing from a development perspective supports that and allows us to optimize that going forward as well. And also make sure that what we're aiding from a planning perspective has commercial and profitability at the heart of it, making sure that we're empowering users to make the right business decisions when it comes to things like price optimization or markdown optimization, something that we already do today, and making sure that fundamentally we're offering value at all these different components and that it has a real fundamental tangible benefit when it comes to the bottom lines, the profit and loss accounts. That's where it needs to continually be the focal point of our development as well. Okay, so we'll go into a little bit of what's coming up next, and I've just highlighted a few areas that I think are going to be of interest today. There's hundreds of areas that are on our roadmap that we're continually developing and looking at. I've just highlighted a few of them for discussion here, and we'll pick that up. So the first thing that I'm going to touch on is machine learning. We had a whole session on it yesterday. It's not going away. So I'll touch on a few components of the development that we're doing there. Then we'll talk about workload forecasting, another really interesting area. I'll talk about the unification between workforce and what we're doing from a supply chain perspective. We'll go into that in a bit more detail. And then we'll talk about a capacity limit-based smoothing, as well as how we manage fresh product behavior, another really exciting area that's going to add a lot of benefit, a lot of value going forward. Then we'll talk about a completely new area that we're going into. It's something called Assortment Rationalization, before talking about macro space, or otherwise known as floor planning, before some really exciting developments from a UX perspective as well. Okay, so firstly, machine learning, what we're doing here. And at the crux of this, really, these are some of the components that we already have in place. So we already have a very, very fundamental and core, robust what we call Demand AI, which is a framework for how we run our machine learning algorithms. And it takes into account many, many different demand influencing factors. And what we're really trying to do now is to remove the limitations for what could be considered. So be able to take in any kind of data point and assess that alongside all the other data points that we know are in consideration here as well. And try to limit the trade-offs that you need to make between the correlatory impact of those different components. That's another fundamental aspect of what we're trying to do to really drive some of those improvements. So an example of that is maybe barbecue products. We know that there's a correlation with temperature, but we really want to see the individual coefficient levels of impact between temperature, day of week, the season itself, any promotional activity or anything else that's potentially impacting that product. And if we can really assess that on the most granular level, it's going to help all of our planning processes going forward as well. So that's a key component. We discussed ML in detail yesterday, but some of those kind of the improvements in that area will allow us to cover even more of the corner cases. So fundamentally, ML is going to improve our forecast accuracy from the most basic product. But how does it do with super slow sellers, for instance, which has historically been a massive problem in terms of forecast accuracy as well? They're some of the areas that we're really looking to dive into. They're complex situations that need complex solutions, and our advanced kind of ML approach will allow us to do that, whether that be to take in new data sources or to have different factors going on in our regressors or whatever it may be, different hierarchical models and estimation. That's what we're looking at doing right now as well. So continual improvements in that area. So the next thing I want to touch on is workload forecasting. So we're talking about unifying and unification between the different functional areas that RELEX operates in. And this is another key example. By using data typically found in the supply chain side of the offering, we can actually influence something that would typically be considered within the workforce side. So workload forecasting would be able to take in all of our projection information and forecast information and convert it to any kind of unit of measure that's required, whether that's number of customer visits, delivery of picking lines, cases, or even a conversion into hours. So that allows us to really utilize that data to drive better performance from a resourcing and planning perspective when it comes to labor. So the cost of labor is obviously key. We mentioned that before, and something that retailers are constantly focused on. So this allows us to focus on that and to drive a benefit in a much more effective and focused manner as well. There's already workload forecasting in place in the latest release of RELEX, but there's improvements upcoming, and there'll be further enhancements on that as we go along this journey as well. The next one pertains to fresh, and again, a very exciting area of improvement for us, and it touches on the machine learning aspect that I mentioned before as well. So today, some of the models in place that you see in the marketplace are based on things like first in, first expiry, or last in, last expiry, those kind of logic, or even last in, first expiry. So we really wanted to take a different approach to this. We're using Bayesian inference to project and take into account likely consumer behavior. So I don't know about you, but when I go to the supermarket, I'm going to pick something with the longest shelf life that I can see. And that's typical across the marketplace. So we want to actually use probability distributions to understand that in a little bit of a better manner and be able to project those instances happening and therefore take them into account from our projected spoilage, which in turn allows us to ensure that our inventory levels are at the correct place to manage that. Another aspect of that is that we need to consider things like likeliness to sell profiles. So over the course of a product's life cycle or shelf life, it will degrade in quality, and we know that has a distinct impact on the consumer behavior as well. So we want to understand, what does that do in terms of needing to replenish? Because you're never going to sell this product if it doesn't look visually appealing in some cases. So those factors kind of tied into what we already do from a fresh optimization perspective gives us a really exciting kind of solution end to end there that I think is going to drive even more benefit to what we're seeing already. And the proof of concept is already underway at the first customer, so that's targeted for general release very soon. So you'll hear more about that shortly, I'm sure. And then another one that personally I'm very excited about is the capacity limit-based smoothing. Now, we already do a lot around capacity management, and we've spoken about delivery flow smoothing before, the idea that we're automatically able to smooth based on magnitude spikes in the delivery, i.e. if we're looking at a period of time and we know that the deliveries peak on a certain point, we can smooth that across the time period to make sure there's no potential breach, or it's just more efficient from a planning perspective. Well, now we can actually tie that directly in with capacity limits. And the key component here, I think, is that those are subject to change across the period of a year. So at peak time, your limit may differ from what it may be a non-peak time. And I really think there's going to be efficiencies here to mitigate any potential breaches on space, the potential to reduce the need for third-party space, which is a significant cost to retailers typically, and then also the labor component to this. So resourcing, knowing that you're going to be able to smooth over a longer time period and not have an influx of deliveries all at the same time, which you won't necessarily have the resource to manage and cater for as well. It also allows us to manage other significant events during the year, like Chinese New Year or vendor closure as a whole, which has a massive impact on the supply chain as well. So a key development in that area as well. Now, this is another exciting kind of unification approach to how we're thinking about product. This is what we call assortment rationalization. So this really brings into play category management-based principles alongside supply chain data, which is kind of key to some of our thinking as well. So one thing is direct product profitability, which allows for a robust assessment of performance and gives key insight into the performance of a user's assortments. It allows them to make quick decisions around what products to drop or extend across a range as well. So typically assortment planning in this area requires multiple additional interfaces and data feeds. We're managing this with what we would typically take from a forecast and replenishment implementation anyway. So again, it's another kind of insight on top of what we're already providing to give another layer and allow for some of those silos to be broken across category management and supply chain as well. It really opens up a discussion topic for users to have internally on how to maximize profit per space, as it were. So we want to make sure we're maximizing all the shelf space to make sure it ties in with improved sales as well as profitability as well. And this is an area where that's really coming to light as well. And talking on the space side, RELEX macro space is coming, and whilst we have had a floor planning offering for quite some time, this is almost a complete rebuild of some of that logic. Firstly, it's cloud-based, but then it's also incorporating and augmented with other types of comparison tools and heat mapping. So it's a real step ahead of what we've had in the past as well. Category sequencing is another key focus area, particularly for brick and mortar retailers. And in combination with some of the supply chain functionality, again, like main replenishment days, we can really assess the impact of store layout and the potential cost saving with some of the store layouts, as well as obviously maximizing sales where applicable as well. So it's a really exciting tie-in with other components of the RELEX products. Again, also with RELEX on the go, which is the store-focused application, which allows the communication of some of these floor plans directly with our store operatives and aiding efficiency from that communication path as well. So we see real benefits in both the development of this from a functional component, but also tying in with some of the other areas of supply chain offering, category management offering, and labor resourcing as well. And finally, just want to take some time to discuss the UI and the UI/UX improvements. So this has been a focus for us for quite some time, and making sure that we're taking on board all of our customer insight into their experience with the product fundamentally. it's important that whilst we have the functional capability, that we augment that with something that's going to be easy to use and fundamentally improve people's working lives as well. So this is an example of what it may look like in the future. And you can see it's a lot cleaner, a lot sharper look to it. I'm really excited to see how this is taken on board and seen by our customer base going forward as well. Navigation is going to be slightly different within this. So a new folder view that has section titles, bookmarks, recently opened views, which I know has been requested a lot as well. There's also the idea of a task list, again, to better manage people's daily activities and tie that into everything that we're trying to do from a project standpoint as well. Also be a new application header and an updated menu and tab hierarchy that we're all very used to. And then fundamentally a more responsive UI. So this is, again, always important that the crux of everything that we're doing is that it's performant and that the users have a great experience alongside what they're trying to do. And also visualization. So new graphical interfaces, including horizontal bar charts, stacked curve bar charts, spark lines, and even pie charts. The trusty pie charts are back. Improving existing pie charts and the campaign highlights. So again, something that we get a lot of feedback on and we're really taking very seriously. We have a dedicated UX team that are constantly looking to get customer insight in these areas, as well as continually develop based on market trends and things like that as well. So making that all feel a lot more visual, a lot more modern, and a lot more usable. Fundamentally, that's the crux of everything that we're trying to do here. Okay, so that's actually what I wanted to focus on today. So any questions, please jump in and let me know.
Wow, Josh, there's so much to look forward to. And I totally see how we are moving retail forward. So thank you so much for that. Let's take a few questions from the audience. So the first one that we have is, what longer term developments are we likely to see?
Okay, yeah, interesting. So I think there's a few factors that are coming beyond what we've mentioned today. So one area that there's a lot of focus on, and we can expect some development on as well, is something like network optimization. So we talked about how both the kind of urbanization aspect and the disruption that we've seen has moved business models more to micro fulfillment, to different approaches when it comes to regionality of distribution centers and things like that. So over time, I think that's only going to continue. And we're going to have to see the balancing of inventory across the different supply chain nodes. And when we think about network optimization, we can tie that in with transportation and delivery methodology as well to really understand where's the best place for this inventory and where's the best delivery mechanism, whether that be something like locker delivery and dynamically pooling some of that delivery capability across multiple different locations within an urban setting. Things like that, I think, are really going to come into play in the forefront. It's something that we're beginning to do a lot of research on to understand from a solution perspective how we can support and actually optimize in that area. Another area around forecasting would be something like demand transference. So as we move or as products move in a service from different locations, how do you tie their historical sales and performance onto that to make sure that you're forecasting in the most effective manner? We already do a bit of that today, but really looking at how we productize that and make that as efficient and effective as possible as well.
Absolutely. And tying that into customer experience and where your customers are and how quickly, like what exactly you need and where you need to be to really quickly deliver to those customers is really, really, really important moving forward. So one other question that we have is, as customers in North America, how do we get our strategic requirements into the RELEX roadmap?
Okay, well, I guess that's my job. So as a director of product, and like I said before, fundamental to all of our development is the customer. It's always the focal point. We're not going to produce anything that's not going to have a direct benefit on our customer base. So with that, we're doing a lot of what we call business review meetings, strategic alignment, to make sure that we're both expressing what we're doing from a roadmap perspective and getting feedback on that, but also gaining the insight from our customer base to influence that roadmap and see how we're really driving that forward. We are a global company, of course, but the US does, and North America does remain a focal market for us, and it does operate slightly different to EMEA in many different ways. So we have to take that on board and make sure we're feeding it back into our roadmap. And that's something that the product team in North America is focused on, which is an ever-growing team. So we do have representation here. And I'd kind of suggest to any of our customers to reach out either to myself or a member of the product team, and we can follow up on anything, whether it be deep diving into strategic vision or requirements on their side, to make sure that we're best serving them from that perspective as well.
Yeah, and as we heard yesterday, innovation is really, really important to driving that change. And you can really, innovate based on their suggestions. So communication between RELEX and, obviously your customers is really, really big for innovation moving forward.
Completely. Yeah, absolutely.